Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your schedules to meet. We've worked very hard on developing plans for the next quarter to expand the services we provide for the community. Mainly, we have discussed our interest in purchasing the old general store building on Maple Street to house our new academic support service and youth center. This plan has been in motion for a long time, and I believe an opportunity has presented itself to help us get started.
The Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity announced a grant that opened last week. The program can help fund the purchase and rehab of the old general store and get us closer to our goal.
A grant? Wow, that means free money, right?
It's not that simple. Obtaining a grant from the state would be huge for us, but we also need to be prepared for what requirements they may have and what the expectations may be.
I've never written a grant before. I've heard it can be complicated. Are we sure we're ready?
How can we be sure that our grant application and program will be successful?
Hello and welcome to the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity Grantee Training. In this presentation, we will discuss what you as a potential grantee need to know about completing a grant application and implementing a successful program. Those curious about grants should be aware of some key information before applying for a program. In this presentation, we will talk about where to find grant opportunities, what a notice of funding opportunity is and its contents. We will discuss developing a plan and what to consider before you apply. Then we will talk about the Uniform Grant Agreement and what the post-award process looks like, including what is required of grantees upon acceptance of a grant. This information is extremely important to consider when looking for a grant because grantees need to be mindful of their capacity to meet requirements and adhere to a grant agreement.
I found this really interesting NOFO on the CSFA page.
Wait, what is a NOFO?
And what does CSFA mean?
CSFA stands for Catalog of State Financial Assistance. This is where you can find grant award opportunities from all state of Illinois agencies. NOFOs are Notice of Funding Opportunities.
Cool. I'm really interested in working with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Are there DCEO grant opportunities in the CSFA too?
Yes, but also we can go to the DCEO Apply for Funding page. The Apply for Funding page lists all active grant opportunities exclusive to the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity.
Tell me more about the NOFO. What information can we find there?
A Notice of Funding Opportunity, commonly referred to as a NOFO, is a planning tool used to outline expectations, conditions, and considerations of the grant. It formally announces state or federal pass-through funding availability through financial assistance programs. The NOFO contains standardized language as well as program-specific information to be reviewed by potential grantees. The NOFO covers everything a grantee needs to know. For example, the announcement provides eligibility and evaluation criteria, details on how and when to submit completed applications, contact information for the funding entity, and how the application will be reviewed. The NOFO outlines all details potential grantees need to know about the award process and the award itself. The first step in developing your grant application and program is to review the NOFO as thoroughly as possible. Having a complete understanding of the grant opportunity, including who is eligible. What requirements will there be? How much money will grantees need to get started and beyond is key to creating and implementing a successful program. The program description will explain the purpose of the program, what is expected and what is required, and if it's appropriate for the organization. When reviewing the NOFO, grantees should review items such as eligible expenditures to determine if their needs will be covered by the grant. This will help grantees understand if they will be able to successfully complete the program with the available grant funds and account for those expenses that won't be covered. Grantees should also keep in mind that grant expenditures must be matched by performance measures. Thorough accounting and documentation should support the progress of your grant program and costs incurred. Grantees should also be prepared to provide funds if match funding or cost sharing is required.
I'm glad we were able to break down the NOFO and dig into the details. I feel like this grant could be a perfect fit. What are your thoughts?
I agree. I believe we now have a firm grasp on the requirements, and I'm confident that our organization is eligible and that our expenditures are appropriate.
I can't wait to get started. What's our next step?
Grantees should get started by registering themselves and their organizations in the GATA Grantee portal. GATA stands for Grant Accountability and Transparency Act, which is landmark legislation that increases accountability and transparency in the use of grant funds while reducing the administrative burden on both state agencies and grantees through adoption of the federal grant guidance and regulations codified at 2 CFR Part 200 or uniform requirements. The GATA Grantee portal is a centralized system where grantees complete required reporting and assessments. Within the portal, grantees can manage organization access, find contact information for their cognizant agency, elect an indirect cost rate, and review their pre-qualification status. The state of Illinois has defined a set of requirements for all organizations seeking to receive grant funding. Entities who wish to do business with the state of Illinois must meet these requirements to be deemed qualified and in good standing. Pre-qualification demonstrates that an organization has met all legal requirements and obtained all of the necessary registrations. Obtaining pre-qualification is an extremely important first step in a grantee's planning process. Pre-qualification requires a valid Unique Entity Identifier, or UEI, and active and public registration in sam.gov. Grantees must have a valid Federal Employer Identification Number, also known as a FEIN, and a Certificate of Good Standing with the Illinois Secretary of State. Please note that the Certificate of Good Standing is required of non-governmental entities. Pre-qualification also requires that grantees are not on the Federal Excluded Parties List, the Illinois Stop Payment List, and the Illinois DHFS Sanction List.
What makes a good application?
How can we convey how important it is for us to get this grant so we can fulfill our goals for expanding the resources we offer to the community?
Buying and rehabbing the old general store would give us the space we need to accommodate more students. We could increase office space for our staff and volunteers. The building would also give us somewhere to host our outreach programs and fundraising events.
Let's start creating a list of everything we can do with the space to maximize our potential. We should explain the needs of our community and what a difference we can make.
Maybe we can include some letters of support from members of the community?
And maybe some testimonials from our students and their parents.
Great idea. Let's make sure those are appropriate for including by checking the NOFO. While we're at it, let's review the other required documentation again.
When completing a grant application, grantees should emphasize the difference their program can make in their community. They should be able to convey a need and how their grant program will address it. Review the criteria outlined in the NOFO and answer questions in the project narrative with criteria in mind. Grantees should be as descriptive as possible and assume those reviewing the application know nothing about your program. Grantees should use the application as an opportunity to provide research that supports your program, cite references that demonstrate practicality, need, and success of similar programs or projects. A grant application should also convey that the grant funds will be used appropriately. When completing the required budget template, grantees have the chance to demonstrate responsible spending and planning. The budget template is the backbone of the proposal. Inaccuracy can mean a deduction in points. The difference of 1 or 2 points can absolutely mean the difference between getting the grant and not getting the grant. While completing the budget template can be overwhelming, detailed instructions are available. Remember, it is important to take your time when completing the budget and reach out to the program contact identified in the NOFO to address any questions or confusion. To ensure accuracy, grantees may also find it helpful to obtain quotes for goods and services while completing the budget. Acquiring quotes doesn't mean that a grantee needs to start spending funds before they even have them. Grant applications require additional documentation. Documentation may vary from program to program and can include the grant application, program application, the budget template, completed conflict of interest disclosure, as well as mandatory disclosure. Grantees who submit incomplete or unsigned documentations can be rejected for grant funding. Grantees should double-check that all documents are completed, signed, and included in the application package.
Uniform grant application?
Check.
Uniform budget application?
Check.
Conflict of interest disclosure?
Check.
Mandatory disclosures?
Check.
Application documents?
Check. And submit.
Well done, everyone.
I'm so excited that we have completed our application for the grant, but this is really just the beginning.
That's right. Even receiving the award isn't the end of the process. Obtaining the funding is going to set our project in motion, but it doesn't mean we've reached the finish line.
As we read in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the grant is going to be a process and we will be submitting reports, completing audits, conferring with our grant manager, and providing proof of our performance. We will still have a lot of work to do.
But we're still allowed to be excited. This is just the beginning.
What happens from here?
The Notice of Funding Opportunity addresses what the review process is going to look like for grant applications. A review committee is established. DCEO requires a minimum of 3 individuals for the committee, and the members of the committee are to submit a conflict of interest certifying that any potential conflict, such as previous working relationships with grantees, does not exist. Applications are graded using a merit review process and scored based on need, capacity, and quality, at a minimum. The merit-based review process is subject to appeal. However, competitive grant appeals are limited to the evaluation process. Evaluation scores may not be protested. Only the evaluation process is subject to appeal. The appeal must be submitted in writing to the department within 14 calendar days after the date that the grant award notice has been published. The written appeal shall include the name and address of the appealing party, the identification of the grant, and a statement of reasons for the appeal. Successful applicants will be contacted by a grant manager to develop a grant agreement. Please note, this process can take months to complete. However, applicants are contacted whether or not they are to receive a grant. In this phase, the grantee is to work with their grant manager to complete requirements that will inform the structure of their eventual grant agreement. The grant agreement is built upon the intent of the grant program and is informed by factors that emerge within the grant application review process. Evaluation of risk assessments, organizational structure, and track record help build the foundation of the grant agreement, having identified and mitigated any potential weaknesses.
Congratulations to everyone again for receiving this grant. We have just received our grant agreement and we should take the time to review it as a team.
I've taken a look and the grant agreement contains some really important information for us to keep in mind throughout our grant program.
Like what?
One important item is procurement. As we know, we can't just spend grant funds on our own without following the proper procurement procedure.
Of course, DCEO needs to know how and where we are spending our funds.
Exactly. It also addresses record retention, which is important for us to consider as we transfer and organize our files at our new location.
Does it address compliance? What happens if we miss a deadline? Will they cut off our funding?
Possibly. It depends on what is out of compliance and how quickly we can remedy the situation. Let's all review the grant agreement individually, then come back together to talk through our questions and concerns as a team.
Grantees should review their grant agreement to understand what will be required of them and how to ensure a successful grant program. Within the grant agreement, grantees will learn more about reporting requirements associated with the grant award. Regular periodic reporting is required of all grantees unless specified. Reporting frequency can vary from grantee to grantee, so having a realistic idea of your organization's capacity to complete the required reports is important. Non-compliance with reporting can result in the disruption of your grant program. the Uniform Grant Agreement addresses audit requirements. Audits are required of grantees every year in which they have an active grant award. Some grantees have experienced difficulty hiring an accounting firm for their audit, and this can cause delays or overdue audit reporting. DCEO encourages grantees to engage with an accounting firm early to ensure their audit is addressed and completed on time. It should also be noted that grantees will likely incur auditing costs and should plan ahead for this expense. The grant agreement also discusses the Grantee Compliance Enforcement System, or GCES. This system allows DCEO to manage instances of grantee noncompliance. By catching and navigating noncompliance, GCES helps protect grantors and grantees and helps manage the potential disruption of grant programs. Examples of noncompliance include late reporting, failure to submit reports, failure to address monitoring issues, and other potential items. Grantees should thoroughly review their grant agreement once it is received and continuously refer back to it during their grant lifetime. Most, if not all, questions about the grant program can be answered either by the Notice of Funding Opportunity, grant agreement, by a grant manager, or by contacting the DCEO Grant Help Desk. This training provided a glimpse into the world of grants with DCEO, but there is still so much more to learn. Videos like this are available in the Video Training and Resources Library on the DCEO Grantee Resources page. Here you can learn further details on topics mentioned in this training. Visit dceo.illinois.gov/dceo-grants to review our full collection of video tutorials. DCEO seeks to ensure the success of all grant programs. We seek to provide the resources and support needed for grantees to carry out their projects. We wish all interested applicants the best of luck. We look forward to working with you. Thank you for watching this presentation on applying for grants with DCEO. For more information, visit the DCEO Grantee Resources page by scanning the QR code on your screen or by visiting dceo.illinois.gov/dceo-grants. If you have questions, you may contact ceo.granthelp@illinois.gov.